Homeless little black boy and his addicted mother find a millionaire family. Their lives are changed forever. Malik Carter had learned from an early age that life wasn't about dreams or aspirations. It was about surviving, about getting through the day. He had learned the hard way that the world didn't care who you were or where you came from. The world, for him, had always been cold, indifferent, and often cruel. Raised by a mother who was too caught up in her own struggles to ever really be there for him, Malik spent most of his childhood bouncing between foster homes, never really feeling like he belonged anywhere. When he was with his mom, there was the constant hum of her addiction, the vacant stares, the broken promises. When he was in foster homes, there was the constant need to adjust, to please, to not be too much of a burden. By the time Malik was 17, he had learned to keep his head down, to blend into the background, to be invisible. He had no family to rely on, no support system, and his life felt like it was written in the margins of other people's stories. He spent his nights wandering the streets of Detroit, moving through the city with a quiet sort of desperation. He had never known comfort, had never known the warmth of a steady home, but it was in the chaos of the city that he learned to survive. His sneakers, worn thin, squeaked on the wet pavement as he walked through the city's forgotten corners, his hoodie pulled tight around his face to shield himself from the rain. The storm was relentless, and he didn't care. The rain, the chill in the air, it was all part of the reality he had come to know. He didn't belong anywhere, and he had no illusions about his place in the world. He was just one more person trying to make it through the day, trying to keep moving. But somehow that night, his feet led him to Cass Technical High School, the same high school he had once attended, though it now felt like a different world. The stadium lights flickered in the distance, illuminating the soccer field below. It had been years since Malik had played a sport, since he had even thought about being part of something bigger than himself. The sound of the ball bouncing, the athletes shouting to each other, felt so alien, so far removed from the world he knew. He lingered in the shadows, watching the game unfold. For the first time in ages, he felt something stir within him, something that resembled hope, but also something that made him uncomfortable. The athletes on the field moved with purpose, with strength, with confidence. They belonged there. And then, amidst the crowd, he saw them. A couple standing in the bleachers, their smiles soft and genuine, their hands intertwined. They seemed so out of place here, in this school, in this city, in this life that Malik had grown used to. The man was tall, with a broad build that looked like he could take on the world. His leather jacket was slightly worn, but it spoke of someone who had been through some battles and had come out on the other side. The woman beside him had a warmth in her eyes, a kindness in her smile that Malik couldn't quite understand. He had learned to expect nothing but emptiness from people, so this display of affection, of simple human connection, felt alien. They noticed him, standing off to the side, and Malik froze. He couldn't help it. His instinct was to shrink away, to hide, to avoid drawing attention. But the man's gaze softened, and he stepped closer, his voice calling out over the field. "Hey, you okay?" Malik stiffened, but he didn't run. It wasn't in him anymore to run. The woman beside the man smiled, a warm, inviting smile, and Malik's heart skipped in his chest. He hadn't seen kindness like this in a long time. His mouth went dry. "I'm fine," Malik muttered, looking away, trying to hide the tremor in his hands. He didn't want their pity. He didn't want their charity. He had seen too much of that in his life. "You don't have to be out here alone," the woman said gently, her voice carrying across the cold air. "We live just around the corner. Come with us. We'll get you something warm to eat. You don't have to stay out here in the rain." The offer lingered in the air, so foreign and unfamiliar that Malik didn't know how to respond. He had spent his whole life learning that nothing came without strings, that help always came with expectations. But there was something about these strangers that felt different, something real, something he couldn't ignore. I don't want to be a burden," Malik finally said, his voice small. The man smiled, a reassuring smile that seemed to say everything without words. "You're not a burden. Come on, let's get out of the rain." Against every instinct that had kept him alive this long, Malik found himself nodding. He didn't know why he agreed, but the warmth of the invitation, the promise of something beyond just surviving, pulled him in. So he followed them. The ride to their home felt surreal, like he was drifting in and out of a dream. The streets of Detroit faded away, replaced by wide avenues, neatly kept lawns, and houses that seemed to stand as symbols of lives he had never known. Their house was large, not extravagant but comfortable, filled with a warmth that Malik hadn't felt in years. The scent of something cooking wafted from the kitchen, a smell so rich and inviting that it made his stomach rumble with hunger. It wasn't just the food. It was the feeling of being safe, of being welcomed. "Come in, Malik," Olivia the woman said gently. "We got plenty of food. You've had a long night." Malik nodded, still unsure of how to act, how to respond to the kindness that was being extended to him. But he followed them inside, unsure of what else to do. As he stepped into the living room, he noticed how different it was from his memories of childhood homes. This house wasn't broken, it wasn't cold, it wasn't full of empty promises. The walls were adorned with pictures, the furniture was comfortable, and there was a sense of peace in the air. It was a peace that Malik didn't know how to accept. Olivia led him to the dining room, where a bowl of soup sat steaming on the table. It was nothing fancy, but to Malik, it was everything. He sat down at the table, his hands shaking slightly as he picked up the spoon. He hadn't eaten a real meal in days, and the warmth of the soup hit him harder than he expected. "It's okay," Robert the man said, his voice low and reassuring. "Take your time." Malik nodded, but the tears came anyway. He tried to blink them away, but it was no use. He couldn't remember the last time he had felt like this, safe, cared for, like he wasn't alone in the world. The tears were a mixture of relief and exhaustion. But they felt like something else, too, like a door he had kept shut for so long was finally starting to crack open. The following weeks were a blur of change. Malik began to feel like he was waking up from a long, deep sleep. He had a roof over his head. He had food. He had people who actually cared whether he lived or died. But even as his life began to stabilize, the shadows of his past still lingered. The trauma of growing up in a broken system didn't just disappear because of a kind meal or a warm bed. His past still whispered to him in the quiet moments in the corners of his mind. School was a battleground. Despite everything that had changed, Malik still felt like an outsider. He couldn't shake the feeling that the kids around him didn't understand him, that they didn't see him as one of their own. They saw a kid who didn't belong, who didn't fit in, no matter how hard he tried. It didn't help that the whispers had started again. This time, it wasn't just the usual teasing from the jocks. There were rumors about him being the charity case, the project that the Andersons had taken in. But Malik wasn't the same person he had been when he first arrived at their house. He didn't let the comments get to him. He stayed focused. He had to. He was on the soccer team now, something he had never thought possible. And though he wasn't the best player, he worked hard. Every practice, every drill, he poured himself into it. When the game day came and the score was tied at 2-2, it was Malik who found himself with the ball at his feet in the final seconds. There was no time to think, no time to second-guess himself. He had to act. He took a deep breath, focused on the goal, and with a quick, fluid motion, sent the ball into the net. The crowd roared as his teammates swarmed him, lifting him into the air, shouting his name. For the first time in a long time, Malik felt something inside him he hadn't in years: pride. It wasn't about being accepted. It wasn't about being seen. It was about him, about proving to himself that he was capable, that he was more than just a story of survival, that he could be someone who mattered, not just in the eyes of others, but in his own. The celebration after the game was loud, full of high fives and claps on the back. Malik could feel the weight of the moment, but also the sense of accomplishment that came with it. He had earned this. He had fought for this. For the first time, he didn't feel like he was running from something. He felt like he was moving towards something. His future, his identity, it was his to shape. Later that evening, after the adrenaline of the game had worn off, Malik sat in the Andersons' living room, a towel draped over his shoulders, sipping on a glass of water. The house was quiet now, and Malik let the peace wash over him. Robert and Olivia had gone to bed, but Malik wasn't tired yet. There was too much running through his mind, too many thoughts he needed to sort out. He walked to the window and gazed out at the quiet street, his reflection faintly visible in the glass. It was then that Zoe texted him, a simple message: "You did it. Proud of you, Malik. Really proud." Malik smiled to himself. Zoe had been a constant throughout the months since he joined the soccer team. She had never judged him, never treated him like the kid from the wrong side of town. She had been there, offering encouragement, pushing him to be better, and just being a friend when he needed one the most. It wasn't just her words now that meant so much, it was the silent understanding between them. She knew him in ways that few people ever would. "Thanks, Zoe," he texted back, the words feeling like a small victory of their own. In the days that followed, Malik's life began to settle into a rhythm. School wasn't easy, but it was manageable now. The constant feeling of being an outsider still lingered, but it was fading slowly. His relationship with the Andersons grew stronger each day. Olivia was gentle with him, patient, always offering advice when he needed it. but never pushing him too hard. Robert, though gruff at times, had a quiet wisdom that Malik was beginning to appreciate. They both gave him something he had never had before, a sense of belonging, a sense of family, even if it wasn't his biological one. The thing that had always haunted him, though, was the question of his mother. Loretta was still somewhere out there, somewhere on the streets, somewhere caught in the tangled web of addiction. He hadn't seen her in over a year, but the occasional call still came through, sometimes from an unknown number, sometimes from a blocked one. She never seemed to change, never seemed to understand the depth of the hurt she had caused. Malik had learned long ago that hoping for a miracle when it came to her was a losing game. She was broken, and he was beginning to accept that he couldn't fix her. But there were still moments, late at night, when he wondered about her, when he thought about the little boy he used to be, the one who had dreamed of a different life, a life where his mother could love him the way he needed. He knew that part of him would always carry that hope, even if he couldn't act on it. One evening, after finishing his homework, Malik found himself staring at the phone. Loretta had called again, her voice barely audible over the static. "Malik, baby, I'm so sorry. I know I messed up, but I need you. I can't do this on my own." He swallowed hard, the weight of her words sinking deep into his chest. Part of him wanted to hang up, wanted to forget about her altogether. He didn't owe her anything, not after everything she had done. But there was a smaller part of him, a part that still wanted to believe she could change, that still hoped she might one day be the mother he had always dreamed of. He let the phone ring, listening to her voice crackle in the silence, and finally he spoke. "Mom, you can't keep doing this. You can't keep asking me to fix things. I can't do it. I'm trying to build a life, and you're still stuck." There was silence on the other end, then a soft sob. Malik closed his eyes, feeling the exhaustion in his bones. "I want to help you, but I can't keep sacrificing myself for you," he continued, his voice shaking. "I'm not your savior. You have to want to change for yourself." The line went dead after a long pause, and Malik sat in the quiet, the weight of the conversation sinking into him. He didn't know if this was the right decision, but he knew it was the one he had to make. He couldn't keep carrying the weight of her choices. He had to let go. The months that followed were transformative. Graduation day came quickly, and Malik found himself standing on the football field, his heart pounding in his chest. He wasn't the same person he had been when he first walked through those doors, uncertain and afraid. He had grown, had learned how to stand up for himself, how to let go of the past, and how to embrace the future. Zoe was there, of course, smiling proudly beside him. Robert and Olivia were in the crowd, cheering louder than anyone else. Malik felt the weight of their support, of everything they had given him. He wasn't alone anymore. He wasn't just the kid who survived. He was someone who had built something from nothing, and it felt like a victory. As he crossed the stage to receive his diploma, Malik's mind went back to that moment years ago when he had walked the streets of Detroit, alone and uncertain of his future. Now here he was, a future that wasn't just about surviving, a future that was his to create. And for the first time in his life, Malik Carter felt like he belonged.